So since 3D printing became the norm for silencer companies, it has been a race to the top for who can make the best super small 5.56 can. So this is the Hesychia 5.56 by Irregular Design, and I have to say, first off, the name is super cool. It means lack of chaos or sort of stillness or quietness, and this is easily probably one of my favorite reviews I've done so far, and for sure at the moment, probably my favorite silencer. So, spoiler alert, you know that I'm going to like it and that I think it's pretty impressive, but I think this thing currently might be sitting at the very, very top of what we can consider super high-performing K-cans. So, let's dive in. So let's talk about the Irregular Design Hesychia 5.56 UK. Now, it's going to be hard for me to hide my enthusiasm for this can because I absolutely love it. And full disclosure, Irregular Design did send this to me for review. However, that does not influence what I'm going to say or my opinion of it at all. I think I've been pretty fair on the channel so far with calling out cons or things that I don't like with certain products. But obviously we'll get into it, but I love this can.
I love lamp. Do you really love the lamp, or are you just saying it because you saw it?
I love lamp.
So when I first started the NFA kind of addiction, I did what a lot of people do, which I don't think is a bad move, and that was I got sort of a universal can that would work on a ton of different calibers. And very, very quickly, as I fell in love with shooting suppressed firearms, I realized that I wanted to suppress absolutely everything that I possibly could and go the route now of dedicated silencers for each particular build and for each particular caliber. And so over the years, through that process and through my sort of silencer accumulation journey, you could call it, I've accumulated now probably 12 to 14 or 15 silencers. And I got to tell you, it's a good thing to have lost count. That's when you know you've got good problems. But it's changed drastically what I'm looking for in a silencer, especially now that 3D printing has become such a massive, massive part of the industry. And so I'm not looking all the time for the absolute quietest silencer that there is necessarily. I'm looking for a lot of attributes and, for me, a lot of balance. And I think the Hesychia 5.56 UK accomplishes that. So let's kind of dive into a couple of the things that make it awesome. And like I said, what I'm typically looking for now in silencers, especially for 5.56, are some very different things than what I used to be looking for. And that is primarily, obviously, really, really good on back pressure. I want a can that is not sending a bunch of toxic gas into my face. Obviously, tone and the decibel just level reduction is still very important to me, but it's not the pinnacle of what I'm necessarily looking for. I don't need the absolute quietest can necessarily. You're also talking about size, how big it is, the form factor, things like that, the weight, and flash mitigation. So this is not something that I have needed to worry about in the past, but as I kind of start jumping into things like night vision and hopefully getting some night vision content for the channel here in the near future, flash mitigation then becomes a much more important thing that I'm looking for out of a can. So what sets the Irregular Design Hesychia 5.56 UK apart from the others, especially in those categories? So how does the Hesychia 5.56 UK sound? I know that I said that max decibel reduction is not something that is my number one sort of attribute or feature that I'm looking for in a can, but it's definitely going to be one of the top traits that a lot of people are looking for in a silencer in general. So with that said, the Hesychia is not the absolute quietest can on the market, but it sounds awesome for the form factor. One of the really big things that Irregular Design worked on was making the quietest silencer they could in a super, super compact form factor. And they have absolutely knocked that out of the park in spades, in my opinion. The tone is very low and thuddy to me, and I compared this to a lot of other full-size cans, as well as some other K-size cans, and compared to the full-size cans, it is a hair louder, but for the size, this is probably 2 or 3 inches shorter than a lot of the other cans that I tested against it. It's getting really, really close to sounding very, very similar, and at least to me, had a bit lower of an actual tone to it. Irregular Design is quoting 135 decibels at the muzzle. And again, for 4.5 to 4.75 inches, that's absolutely absurd performance. And so I was fortunate enough to get the one and only Mike back on the range with me to do a little bit of side-by-side comparisons on very similarly built rifles, and compared this to the Raster 5K, which is a little bit longer of a can. It still is a super awesome performer, but even our camera guy, Phil, who was listening to both cans, said he really couldn't tell a difference. So it shows how just efficient they are getting the sound reduction, and how much they're maximizing the volume in this can to really get those decibels as low as possible for this size. So let's see what it sounds like. Okay guys, so since it sometimes is a little difficult to hear exactly what cans sound like indoors, I have brought the one and only Mike back out, and he's going to be helping me with the Raster 5K from Layer X, which I think is a fantastic can. And we're just gonna be shooting side by side and then swapping places to see if we can get a little bit of a tone or just comparison for how these two sound. Oh, I did it. I was just making fun of him for it. Shoot.
Press checks are free.
And now we will swap sides so that my gun is slightly closer to the microphone. Oh, I can't believe I did that. And we'll let you go first, Mike. I will say they sound pretty close. I'm not sure which one has like a slightly deeper tone. Phil, what do you think?
It's hard to tell. I can't tell, honestly.
I will say the really cool thing, especially for both of those, compared to a lot of cans, is that one is right at like 5, maybe 5.1 inches, and this one is actually under. It's like 4.75 inches. So we're starting to get some ridiculous sound performance out of some very, very tiny cans. And I really didn't feel a whole lot of gas in my face. You guys might see some just because it's a little humid in here, so kind of just will show up a little bit more. But I think these are both pretty awesome cans. And again, for being so small, being able to keep up with some big boys is pretty impressive. That one behind the gun, that one sounds quieter to me.
It's felt a little gassier than that did too.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But that one actually sounded behind the gun quieter to me. And that, my friends, is why you kind of do both, because some cans, especially if they're a little bit higher back pressure, and or just depending on how your gun is tuned, the port of the AR is going to make my ear hear it a little bit differently than, say, Mike would or somebody off to the distance. So, like I said, still super, super quiet, but I think for me, the Irregular has it just by a hair in sound performance. It is just a tiny bit gassier though. And so if you are looking for something that sounds awesome in a super, super compact package, then this is going to be a top contender in my opinion. And a lot of that can be attributed to the ability to 3D print or direct metal laser sintering. And that has just exploded the technological leaps of silencers over the last 3 to 4 years. When you look at the blast baffle of this can, it is absolutely wild and looks like some design from an alien spaceship. It looks absolutely awesome. And I think a ton of the performance can be attributed to all of the crazy, unique sort of design features that was put into this can. The baffles are actually asymmetrical, so you're not getting any copies of baffles throughout this can, and they're really maximizing each stage of the gas that is in this can and the different pressures. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit lower pressure than at the back of the can, so the baffle designs are more tailored to accommodate those different gas densities. And with that being said, I want to talk about this QD system because this muzzle device has a lot to do with some of the features of this can and why it performs so well. So this muzzle device, I believe, is the first one I've ever seen that is actually 3D printed out of 718 Inconel. And this can is also made out of 718 Inconel. And so with both of these being the same material, when you have this on a firearm, you're not going to get any sort of varying expansions. The thermal coefficient of both is the exact same, so they expand and contract with heat at the same rate. So you're not going to get carbon lock, obviously, but you're also not going to get any thermal lock, because sometimes that can also happen. And how do these two parts mate up? So you have a taper that is right here, this sort of angled flat surface, and this is the primary attachment system or QD system. So when you lock this thing down, you get a tremendous amount of force that goes on this taper. They say about 15 pounds of rotational torque on this generates roughly 1,700 pounds of force on the taper. So this thing is not going anywhere. But to sort of create some redundancy and just a more robust design, they have American buttress threads and this sort of tooth system on the back. And what that does is it mates up to these paws in the back of the silencer, and these are actually 3D printed, sort of spring-loaded into the can, which is just super awesome. Maybe it's because I'm really nerdy about stuff like this, but I think it's just incredible and very technologically just cool. And so when you combine these two, the paws locking into the teeth as well as the taper, this thing is not going anywhere. Even if somehow you manage to have an issue where you don't totally seal the taper, as long as it's locked into the paws, it's completely on your host firearm and you're gonna be good to go. At least it's not gonna fly off your rifle or anything like that. And as I mentioned, this is out of 718 Inconel, which I think is probably one of my favorite materials to have silencers in. I know that there's a lot of just talk and hype about 282 Haynes, and although that is also a super phenomenal material, I think generally speaking for silencers, Inconel is a bit better of a choice. It is more designed for rapid heat and rapid cooling cycles as you typically would find on a silencer. So the fact that they're making this out of 718 Inconel is a big plus. And the fact that they're also making their muzzle devices out of Inconel and 3D printing them is pretty awesome. So with it being Inconel, it's going to be a little bit heavier than some other cans in the same form factor, but even for its size and for how robust this thing feels, it's really relatively pretty light. This thing's coming in at 13 ounces, so much lighter than a lot of the other Inconel offerings on the market. It's about 4 3/4 inches, so under 5 inches, and that is very, very short, even as far as K-cans go. It is 1 3/4 inches wide, and the crazy thing is when this is attached to this muzzle device, it is actually only adding about 3 inches to your overall rifle length from the muzzle. So you are keeping this super, super short. So even on longer barreled rifles or pistols, you're still getting a super, super high performing can that is very, very small and not adding a ton of length to it. Okay, so now let's talk about one of the really positive characteristics of the Hesychia 5.56 UK, and that is going to be on back pressure. Now, there are a few intentional features of this can that are designed to control early flow gas and to make sure that the vast majority of the gas that is being generated and going through the silencer actually exits the front, which is assisted by these 6 super small additional vents that are on the front of the can. Relative to some other low back pressure cans, this definitely has a hint more back pressure, but that also is partially because this was designed to maximize sound suppression in a limited space. But even on mag dumps, the gas was still incredibly manageable and very, very minimal compared to a lot of other cans, especially conventional baffle designed silencers. Okay, so let's talk about the flash management of the Hesychia 5.56 UK. Now, something that a lot of people might not realize is the silencer itself and the design internally is not entirely, and potentially, in my opinion, almost not at all responsible for the flash that ends up coming out of the front of the silencer. I think a vast majority of that is an attribute of the muzzle device itself that you happen to be using with your silencer. So this is Irregular Design's micro flow enhancer. They have a macro flow enhancer as well as their hybrid flash hider. So the Irregular Design Micro Flow Enhancer was built specifically for the design of the 5.56 UK. And what it does is it maximizes the amount of gas that is mixing in the initial chamber of the silencer so that it can't reignite when it exits the can. And because of this design, it is extremely good on flash in all of the testing that I've seen. And even for me in a lot of low light shooting, I see absolutely no flash, which for me is now going to be a bit more of an important feature as I start delving into some night vision stuff. And flash mitigation will be something that I am always considering for my silencers. Okay, so let's talk about your options with the Hesychia 5.56 UK. As of now, it comes in 3 colors. You have FDE, you have black, which is the color that I got to test, and you have raw. Now, personally, raw is my favorite color. I don't know what it is, but the raw Inconel, especially printed Inconel, just I think looks awesome. And once you have shot through these and gotten these pretty hot, they get a really cool kind of colorway and patina. So I'm probably looking at getting another one here in the near future, and if that's the case, then I'm definitely personally going to be going with the raw. As well as you have a couple of different muzzle device options. Now, for the 5.56 UK currently, the only one that will fit is the Micro Flow Enhancer, but you also have some of their other muzzle devices just to see the designs, and this is their flash hider that goes in their Hesychia 6K, and I have heard that they may be doing a micro flash hider, so if that becomes the case, then you will have a couple of different muzzle device options. So, is the Irregular Design Hesychia 5.56 the quietest, the lightest, or the lowest back pressure? Maybe not, but it has balanced all of those performance metrics extremely well and has actually become my favorite silencer to date, and is a phenomenal choice for the type of shooter that I am. You get low back pressure, a fantastic tone and good decibel reduction. It is super, super durable, being out of 718 Inconel. It's full auto rated for barrels 10.3 inches and up, and I really pushed this thing hard and it had absolutely zero issues handling it, as well as flash mitigation. And all of that is in a under 5-inch silencer envelope. So it's super, super impressive, and I would consider this a high-performing hard use can. So, what is the verdict on the Irregular Design Hesychia 5.56 UK? It's definitely one of my favorites, and as always, we'll see you on the range.